Good afternoon, everybody. Just going to let some people in here. So we'll get started in a few minutes. So glad you could join us. A quick audio video check. Can everybody hear and see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, we'll just give other people here a few minutes. We're expecting quite a few today. I'm glad you could join us. Good afternoon. I am from Ontario, so I will say good afternoon. Not sure where everybody is calling in from. I just want to say hi in the chat. Feel free to use the chat, ask me any questions as we go along. A little bit of time at the end for a Q&A. And all right. I am recording this session. You get the message when you first logged in. So I will be sharing the recording as well if you are at all interested in that. So glad to have you here live, though. I am very excited to answer any of the questions that you may have around this new quality management system that you're going to have to be implementing this year. All right. Yeah, so just throw in the chat there. Let's just make sure it's working. Just maybe just at least where you're calling in from today. From Biden, Ontario, from Ontario. Perfect. And Mississauga. I used to live in Mississauga a long time ago. Right. Oh, Northern Alberta. Okay, good morning to you. Welcome. That is great. We've been experiencing some pretty decent weather in Ontario. I feel for you out in Alberta, and I guess out in the East Coast, all the fires, that's just been so terrible. All right, well, keep an eye on people coming in. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today on this webinar. I'm just going to spend some time and talk a little bit about what they mean by the system of quality management. Let's get this moving over here. All right. So any questions as we go along, feel free to throw it into the chat. And just trying to get this. My screen is looking very strange at the moment. All right, perfect. All right, welcome. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jennifer O'Neill. I also go by Jennifer McCann. If you see either one of those, they are synonymous, just heading back to my maiden name after a number of years of not being married. So I am currently the CEO here at Tillhouse. So we specialize in cloud-based software for S&P firms. So really, my background is in professional standards. I've worked for a number of accounting firms, but really for the last, it's probably close to 15 years now, I've really been just in the realm of professional standards, working with the standard setters, working with CPA Canada, and acting as really an intermediary between accounting firms and the standard setters, and providing just guidance in terms of how to apply the professional standards, whether that's accounting standards, audit standards, compilation engagement standards, and of course now our quality management standards. So I've had the privilege of working alongside CPA Canada, some amazing people there on their publication. So I was the author of the Quality Management Guide. And then prior to that, the co-author of the Professional Engagement Guide, the Quality Assurance Manual, and the PACT, which is the guide that I would imagine this audience is probably familiar with. If you're not, I'd be happy to provide some more information, but it is a CPA Canada publication on practice advisory compilations in tax. So there's quite a bit of information in there. So I've shared my contact information there with you. I will give you a copy of the slides once we are done, so you can still have that information as well. So as I said, I'm working on this cloud-based software, but I'm also working with accounting firms on training on these standards and as well as consulting to help implement these. So share a little bit of my knowledge with you today. We're just going to give you a high-level understanding of what is involved in a system of quality management and what you can do when you are approaching this exercise. So before I get into the crux of it and the meat of it, I just kind of want to start by a very high level. And I know some of you have been like, well, this is just a compliance exercise. You know, what really is in it for me? So I want to talk about what a quality management system is and then where I think you can actually benefit from it. So a system of quality management is really this overriding system within your firm that promotes quality right throughout the firm. And it's not just about, you know, the engagement report. It's everything that goes into it. It's about the reputation of our profession. It's about the reputation of your firm. It's about your staff, if you have staff. So when we start to look at maybe what are some of the benefits of a quality management system, you know, when we really start to look at it, and we're not saying by these standards that you don't have a quality management system. It's just what we found is that a lot of firms do not have it really, it's not been formalized, it's not been documented. And if it's not necessarily documented, then it's not necessarily being done on a consistent basis. And if there's more than one of you, then it does help to align what those processes are and can drive those key business practices so that you can then take a proactive approach to managing your risks. And by doing that, you can also increase your efficiencies, facilitate management of your firm, have more open and regular discussions on quality. You know, really when you're making decisions about where you want to take your firm, what kind of clients you want to have this, if you have this system in place, it's going to allow you to leverage that information. So if we think about it more in terms of, and it's easier, I think, when we think about it more in terms of our clients. So our clients, we always want them to have good systems in place. We want to make sure that they have appropriate controls so that fraud doesn't happen, so that, you know, their financial reporting is as accurate as can be. We want their business to be successful. And so what we're really doing is taking that thought process, that risk management that is within businesses, and now making sure that as an accounting firm, we are really integrating that into our practice. We want to manage our risks as business advisors, as accountants, as professional accountants. And so we want to look and really say, what could go wrong with your firm? What processes and policies could you put in order to make sure that, you know, those bad things don't happen? So what keeps you up at night and what can be done about it? Now, a lot of this as well is going to kind of fall into even succession planning. We've seen, throughout the years working for accounting firms, we have seen issues with succession planning where something happens to either the sole practitioner or the partners. And in that whole process, you know, something happens, they can no longer continue with the firm. And it's very difficult for someone to either come in, start managing the clients, take over the firm, or sell that practice. So this can help facilitate that as well. So it is, the last point on there, complies with our professional requirements. And I really want to say that, yes, it is a professional requirement that as of this year, you're going to have this system of quality management in place. But there's so many other benefits to it. And I think if you take the time to really embrace it now, really look at your firm and treat it like it is a risk management exercise, I really believe that there can be a lot of benefits to firms. So this may be new to you. If you just have an accounting firm where you're just doing compilation engagements and taxes and business consulting, but you're doing the audits and reviews, this may be something that's completely new to you. When we had CSQC1, it really only applied to assurance engagements. And what happened is that they have now increased the scope of the standard. So now it's audits and reviews is the same, but they've now incorporated all these other related services engagements. And the one that's going to catch most of you is the CSRS 4200 compilation engagements. There are a couple of other related service engagement standards as well, but I don't know how frequent they're used in firms, but they do get caught under the scope of this quality management standard as well. So just just a little highlight here on the effective dates. So back in 2022, this standard became effective for firms that perform audits and reviews and other assurance services. So they needed to have a system of quality management designed and implemented by December of 2022. Now those firms are now getting to the point where they're now going to have to start doing their first annual evaluation. But because who are just compilation engagements, they didn't have that quality assurance manual before. That is now being brought into the fold. They did decide to delay the implementation for an additional year. So this is going to be the summer where you really want to spend some time and really devise, design, and then get that system implemented. So for all of the related services engagements, including those compilations, you need to have your quality management system designed and implemented by December 15th of this year. Then next year, so they say within the first 12 months, you're going to go through and monitor that system and evaluate it at a particular point in time. And then that will give you an understanding. You come up to a conclusion. We'll go through that a little bit. But that's really the effective dates. So for those of you who are performing just the compilation engagements, the key dates for you are December 14th, 2023. That's your first one. And then a year from now, you'll go through that evaluation. So the CSQM is the Canadian Standard on Quality Management, and there's actually two different standards. There's CSQM1, which really deals with setting, designing, implementing, operating, and evaluating this system of quality management within your firm. Then there's CSQM2, which deals with engagement quality reviews. Now, in the current quality control standard, or actually, I guess it's gone now, they didn't have a separate standard for EQRs, the engagement quality reviews. So they've just separated it into two standards. If you're just performing compilation engagements, it's not likely that you would ever have an engagement quality review. However, it may be possible as a response to risks, and we'll get into that. So CSQM1, again, the Canadian Standard on Quality Management, is the standard, and the objective of this standard is to have firms design, implement, and operate this quality management system for those engagements that I already talked about within the scope. So it's going to provide you with reasonable assurance that you and your personnel, and when I say personnel, I'm including all partners and staff, that you fulfill your responsibilities in accordance with the professional standards and what other legal and regulatory requirements that you may have, and then conduct your engagements in accordance with those standards. And then, of course, to make sure that when you're issuing your engagement reports, that they are appropriate in the circumstances. So that's really our overriding objective. So what they've done then is broken it down into 8 components. Now, 2 of those components, I rather think of those as processes. So I have a risk assessment process and I have a monitoring and remediation process. And those 2 processes are really applied over the entire quality management system and over the other 6 components. So there is a component on governance and leadership, on relevant ethical requirements, on client acceptance and continuance, engagement performance, resources, and information and communication. And so within each of these components, they have, in fact, defined these quality objectives. And they basically said that within each of these components, these quality objectives should be met by every single firm. And so what we're going to do is take a look at your firm and identify what may happen that would prevent you from achieving those objectives. So this standard is very much taking a risk-based approach. So we're going to first identify those quality risks, then develop, based on those quality risks, these policies and procedures, and then we're going to monitor those so that we can make sure that they are continuing to work. So this is a very proactive approach to managing quality. So what I'm going to go through for the next probably 30 minutes, and then I'll leave some time for questions, is kind of, this is what I just developed as kind of a 5-step approach. So the first step that we're going to go through is assigning the roles and responsibilities. We're going to get into defining those quality objectives within each of those 6 components, go through and identify those quality risks that would prevent you from achieving those objectives, responding with policies or procedures, and then designing this monitoring system so that you can also, monitoring what's already been done and monitoring for changes in case anything needs to be updated. So the operation of this quality management system is definitely not a one-time event. When we used to have our quality assurance manual, so many firms would just do that. They'd put it on the shelf and really not think about it until practice inspection came back. And hopefully by the time we're through all of this, you can at least appreciate that practice inspection is just ensuring that you've done the right thing, but you want to do this for other reasons. You want to do this because this is going to help you manage the risks within your firm. That's really the ultimate goal here. Okay, so in step 1, we have to assign roles and responsibilities. So what we're going to talk about here is what are the roles and responsibilities that have to be assigned? How are you going to determine who is going to perform those roles? So the standard does set out these 2 main roles. So one of them is the ultimate responsibility and accountability for that system. So that's kind of the buck stops here type of person. Normally it would be to, if you have a managing partner, it would be to that managing partner. You might have if there's maybe 2 or 3 of you, and together you kind of manage the firm as a committee, it could actually be the 3 of you. And then we have operational responsibilities. So that's the individual who's going to make sure that the system is actually working on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones who are going to initially go through and identify those quality risks and determine the responses. And then they'll also be responsible for doing the monitoring and compliance with independence if that is relevant to your firm. Now, although these responsibilities can be assigned to anybody within the firm, they can be delegated, they can even be performed by somebody who's external. However, the ultimate responsibility does remain with the firm. So that role cannot be outsourced. You need that one individual to be that. Now, if you have a small firm, it's possible that these 2 roles would all be combined. So maybe if you are a sole practitioner, you have a small firm, then you will combine these roles. So the first one there is the ultimate responsibility and accountability. And as I said, this is typically assigned to a partner or someone who has that equivalent, who has that direct line of reporting to the individual assigned. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. This one is assigned to the CEO or the managing partner. So this role is who is responsible and ultimately accountable for the firm achieving the objectives of the CSQM1. And they'll be doing the evaluation on whether or not the quality management system has actually achieved its objectives. So that's what we're going to go through and do this at least annually at a point in time to see if that quality management system is acting the way that you expect it to and is managing your quality risks appropriately. Samira has a question for ultimate responsibility for audit review. Does this have to be a PAL holder? No, it doesn't. There's nothing in the standard in CSQM that requires you to be to hold your public accounting license. What the requirement here is around expertise, experience, and authority within the firm. So this ultimate responsibility is really the person who is managing the firm. So they do not have to be a public license holder. Public license is when you are actually having to sign the audit and reviews. We're not actually signing a report here, even though the wording is very audit-like. When we start to get to evaluation, it does talk about reasonable assurance, but it is looking at it in with a different lens. Okay, perfect. So if you are the sole practitioner of your firm, this is going to be your responsibility. If you have more than one partner, you would want whoever's doing the managing partner, or you would assign one of the partners those roles. The other key role is this operational responsibility. So this is, again, typically assigned to a partner or equivalent. Again, they have to have this authority within the firm. So there needs to be a direct reporting line to the individual with ultimate responsibility and accountability. They have to have the appropriate authority. So typically a staff member, even a senior manager at a firm, would likely not have the appropriate authority, because they have to stand up and say, this isn't working right, or we need to increase, do something about our culture, governance, and leadership. There can be some sensitive issues there. And so the standard does talk about the fact that it does have to have the appropriate authority. Now, it's very possible that you may be using external service providers if you do not have the internal resources to do this. So you could use external service providers to help you design the system of quality management, to perform some of the monitoring activities. And I'll talk a little bit about what those monitoring activities are. And then again, to do this evaluation. Now, one of the things that the standard does require in this annual evaluation is to evaluate those two roles and responsibilities and the individuals who are in those roles to assess their performance. So that's going to become part of your annual evaluation as well. So that may be a little different for you. Once you've decided who's doing what, you're going to go in and define your quality objectives. Now, this is probably, if there's more than one of you, this is probably a good exercise. This one and the next one is really good brainstorming. But the objectives, the standard goes through those 6 components and establishes those objectives for you. So what you are going to have to do is go through and see if any of those quality objectives need to be tailored, whether or not you need any additional objectives. Now, for the most part, you are likely going to accept the objectives the way that they are. The only time that you're really going to start to tailor them is when you have, there's objective for human resources. And if you don't have any staff, a lot of those human resources objectives are not going to be relevant for your firm. There's objectives that deal with networks and network requirements and network services. So if your firm isn't part of a network, then those quality objectives also can be tailored out. So I'm going to go through these quality objectives just really quick. As I said, I'm going to distribute the slides after the presentation. So you will have these, but they are just directly from the standard. Now, one thing to remember when you start to look at these quality objectives, they are very cross-component. So they're very interrelated and interdependent. I'll give you some examples as we go through it. So one of the keys to remember when you're looking at these quality objectives is that you don't want to tailor anything out that is still relevant to the firm. What may happen is if you tailor out too much, then you're changing the meaning of what those quality objectives are. So as I said, these, just as an example, I'll go through a couple of them. This is a component on leadership, governance and leadership. So the quality objectives here is really that the firm demonstrates this commitment to quality through a culture, and that you are responsible and accountable for quality. And it's all about the tone at the top under this governance and leadership umbrella. Then there's the relevant ethical requirements. Now this ties into our code of conduct. And code of conduct is at our provincial level, although they've now been, they're all the same amongst all the provinces. You can get your code of conduct from there. Client acceptance and continuance, engagement performance. There's quite a bit in engagement performance, of course. Resources are broken into 3 different categories. So here we deal with human resources. So the people who are actually carrying out work. This would also include individuals obtained from external sources. So if you bring people on, maybe they're not on your payroll, but you bring them in to maybe help out on engagements or help with your quality management system, then they would be considered a human resource as well. And it goes into technological resources and intellectual resources. Technological resources are really looking at your IT system and the ability to get the information that you need. And then intellectual resources is really thinking there more about your methodology. And again, these apply both to the engagements that you perform as well as to the quality management system and the operation of that system itself. So you may have service providers in any one of those areas of the resources. You may have an IT firm who manages your IT. You may have a service provider who helps you with your intellectual resources. So maybe you have templates that you've created for your engagements. And so the methodology within those templates, that type of thing. And then finally, information and communication. Now, there's some information in here that may not be relevant to you. One of the things that they introduced in this component is the requirement to communicate to firms, those firms that are performing audits of listed entities, to communicate about the system of quality management to those charged with governance. So that kind of thing can be tailored out. So once you have those objectives are really key, because the next thing we need to do is understand what in your firm could prevent you from achieving those objectives. So that's when we get into step number 3 in identifying the quality risks. So the first thing we're going to do is really look at the nature, circumstances of your firm and the engagements that you perform. And think about, based on that understanding, what conditions, events, actions, or inactions would prevent you from achieving those objectives. So we're going to consider it in the context of what can go wrong. And then we're pretty much going to say, okay, what can go wrong, which was what I would call a risk. And then we would think about, well, how likely is it that risk is going to happen? And how much would it impact the objective within that component, or maybe across several components? So this is very specific to your firm. So, you're going to think about a number of different areas that could impact those objectives. So the standard lays out a few of them. You can look at these a number of different ways, but they really want you to think about really what is the characteristics and operating characteristics of your firm. How complex is your firm? If you work out of multiple locations, you have multiple partners, this is, lots of staff, you're probably going to have more risks than if you were a sole practitioner. Maybe you have different risks. The standard is really meant to be scalable so that you think about, national or even, international firms, EY, Grant Thornton, even your BDOs and M&Ps, if you think about what could go wrong in that firm, we probably have a lot more because they're a lot more complex. There's a lot more moving parts. Where if you have, a sole practitioner, maybe a couple staff, then you start to think, well, what could really go wrong? And it's going to be very different result than you would have at a large firm. Also thinking about how you make decisions, both on a strategic basis and an operational business basis. What is the business model of your firm? How do you work? What is your leadership style? What about the resources of the firm? So here we could start to think about whether or not you use any service providers for any of those areas. Which standards you're actually subject to. The CSQM1 doesn't actually say that you're subject to this professional standard or this law. So it is important that you define which ones will impact you, your firm, your engagements, your staff. So it may be more than just the CPA handbook. You may want to think about what impacts, even HR, different legislation may have on your business, and incorporate that into it as well. In the case of a network firm, I haven't really dealt with network firms a lot. Especially in this presentation, there are specific requirements around network firms. You would need to understand what services or requirements the network requires of the firm. So is it simply just that you're sharing in marketing material, you're sharing a name, you're sharing maybe just references on an international basis? That might be part of it. But there are some networks that are much more integrated, where there is a specific approach that you're meant to follow. And in those cases, they would likely have network requirements in the quality management system that would be pushed down to your level. So just for now, something to keep in mind. And then thinking about the nature and circumstances of the types of engagements that you perform. So when you start to perform audits and reviews, that is going to increase a little bit more of your risk. Where you're just doing compilation engagements, the likelihood of you having a lot of risk is probably lower. Again, that's the scalability that we can find within the standard. And as well, thinking about what types of entities where those engagements are undertaken. So there are certain industries that are more risky than others. There are certain maybe accounting practices within certain sectors that are more complex. And that can all come into those conditions, events, actions, inactions that may impact those quality objectives. So as I mentioned, you're going to find maybe these risks, and then thinking about whether or not they actually constitute a quality risk. So that would be, how frequently or likely would they be to occur? And then either individually or combined with other risks, what would be the extent that they would negatively impact those quality objectives? So just some examples here that I pulled. There is a component for resources. There's the component for engagement performance. And, when we start to look at what could go wrong within those components, one of the big things that's really come up is really this, potential lack of staff, that you won't have sufficient time, competence, or capability to perform that engagement. So that could be a risk. We have to think about how likely that would be. Perhaps it would be more likely during different times of the year. So you're going through tax season, maybe there is a bit more crunch on staff. How are you going to, what comes after this is how are you going to deal with it? So first of all, we have to identify those risks. And then if we determine that they're quality risks because we believe that they're likely to happen and they are going to impact those quality objectives, then we're going to have to develop appropriate responses. And that's going to come in the next section. Another example of a quality risk may be that within that component for client acceptance and continuance, that you are accepting engagements or continuing with engagements that are not within the risk profile of the firm. So you're just accepting any type of engagement and you're not really thinking about the engagement risk it's possible. Another example is under resources. So unauthorized access to data may result in breaches in confidentiality of information that's contained in that data, destruction of data, improper changes to data. So these are all areas that may introduce risks within, this would be like a technological resource risk. These are really going to be specific, again, to your firm. Now, once we have those quality risks identified, the next thing that we're going to do is develop these policies or procedures to treat those quality risks. Now, the standard does have as well these specific areas that they called specified responses. Now, these specified responses cover off a number of different issues. So the standard setters here are really saying that even though you may not have identified a quality risk in these areas, they believe that there is inherently a quality risk there. So even if you haven't identified a quality risk, you have to have these specific responses. So responses are typically policies or procedures, typically both, I would think, that address these potential risks. So relevant ethical requirements, there is this requirement within the standard that you have to confirm independence on an annual basis. That's an example. Yeah, that's number 2, confirmation of compliance. So the standard basically says that there's enough risk there that you need to have this as a specified response. And so those are those other areas as well. Now, sometimes these specified responses, once you develop policies or procedures to those, they may already address a quality risk. But if you have a quality risk that does not get appropriately responded to by these, then you're going to have to create new policies or procedures. These do not have to be elaborate by any means, particularly if you're a smaller entity. You can just at least just say what you do and how these particular areas are going to be managed. Now, it's possible that if you did have a quality assurance manual in the past, I would definitely use that as a starting point when you're developing your quality risks. In fact, what I've done for a number of clients is taken that quality assurance manual and I've just tailored it and then just referenced it back to where those quality risks are and eliminated any of those policies or procedures that really weren't necessary, weren't required. But you may have other manuals. You may have an HR manual or an IT manual or like an employee handbook, health and safety manual. And it's possible that you already have responses that are there. You don't have to duplicate them. You just want to be able to say where you have actually addressed that quality risk. So here, if we just take an example, we looked at one of those quality risks that said under the client acceptance and continuance that you may accept an engagement that is not within the risk profile of the firm. So when we start to think about, okay, well, what could we do about that? You might want to, this is where you can have a policy that says, you're not accepting reviews or audits. You're not doing any type of assurance work. Maybe there's, you want to restrict your practice to particular industries. Maybe you want to, if it is a larger client in maybe it's in exceeding a certain fee, then you want buy-in from the partners before you bring that engagement over and accept that client. So it's really looking, and that response is going to be very specific to your firm as well. What makes sense for you? It might be defining the type of industry, the type of clients, the type of engagements that you want so that you make sure that you don't accept any that are outside your risk profile. Mention the QAM. This is the quality assurance manual. So this was the manual that we had to have under CSQC1. So essentially what it was before was everybody had pretty much the same policies or procedures. It was tailored a little bit. There was a quality assurance manual for sole practitioners without staff. There was one with sole practitioners with staff, partnerships, those types of things. So if you have one of those, as I mentioned, it is a good place to start. It isn't necessary to maintain it in that nature, but you can. I think it's a good place to start rather than starting from scratch. But if you don't have something to begin with, there is the quality management guide that does have some suggested policies and procedures in there as well. When I talk about policies or procedures, and the standard says you don't have to have both, you could have one or the other, what's most appropriate. I tend to think that policies and procedures go hand in hand. So I think about policies as those statements of what should or should not be. So what should be done in order to address those quality risks. And the procedures are what actions are going to be taken in order to implement those policies. So once we have all of those policies or procedures addressed, so remember, those are going to be your specified responses, as well as if those specified responses do not treat the quality risks identified, you're going to have those additional policies or procedures. Then we need to make sure that those policies or procedures are actually operating in the manner that you intended it to be. Now, when we look at what the standard setters really thought about here, it's not having a perfect quality management system to start with. It's about building on it, and it's about continuous improvement. And so in order to get continuous improvement, we need to monitor that those policies or procedures are actually working as they're intended. And if they're not, we need to understand why. Why are they not working, and how can we remediate those deficiencies? So what our objective here is under monitoring and remediation is to take, provide that information so that you can amend your quality management system as you need to. Take those appropriate actions on a timely basis in order to identify whether there's something that's gone wrong and to respond to it when it has gone wrong. So they talk about two different types of monitoring activities. One is ongoing monitoring activities. Typically think about these ones as being built into your systems. If we think about it, if you want to put your audit hat back on for a little bit, if you remember audits, or even if you're dealing with your clients around controls, I tend to think about these ongoing monitoring activities as more like a preventative control. It's built into your system to prevent something to going wrong, to prevent something to go wrong to begin with. Periodic monitoring activities are something that happens more on a kind of a timed interval basis. You know, it could be quarterly, it could be annually, it could be even every 3 years. And these are going to detect if something actually happened. So I'd consider these more kind of like those detective controls. So it's going to depend on what the underlying response is. So what is the policy or procedure? How often is it being done? And then is there something, what is the underlying risk that it relates to as well? And all of that thought process is going to go into determining what the best type of monitoring activity is. If you don't have a lot of quality risks and you don't have a lot of policies and procedures, you're not going to have a lot of monitoring activities. Tend to think of these almost as a one-to-one basis. So you'll have the policy or procedure and you'll have a monitoring activity that goes with it. You may need more than one, depending on the level of risk that the policy or procedure is addressing. And this is what I just talked about, the reasons for the assessment of the quality risks, the design of those responses, the design of the risk assessment process in total, and the design of the monitoring and remediation process. So when we're doing monitoring and evaluation, we really are looking at the policies and procedures, but we're looking at it more of a system as a whole to see is it operating as we intended it to. So examples of monitoring activities, you could find what you may want to do is a review of in-process files. I know when I was at the professional standards group at a firm, we looked at the financial statements before they went out the door for disclosure type issues, potentially, engagement issues. So that would be something that would be built into the system to make sure that the engagement team was performing the engagement appropriately. You could have review of completed files. So in-process files would probably be more of an ongoing monitoring. It was preventing something from going wrong in the first place. Or completed files would be looked at after the fact. What did happen? What did get issued? Now, review of completed files are a little different than the completed file inspections, although they look very much the same. Review of completed files is really focusing more on your policies or procedures at the engagement level, where completed file inspections are usually looking at it from more like a detailed file review. And did you perform that engagement in accordance with the underlying requirements? So the reason that we're doing it is different, although we're at both times we're looking at completed files. It could also be some staff or partner interviews. It could be reviewing other documents. If you have partners meetings and you keep the minutes of those meetings, it might be, there's something on the agenda every month, and it might just be reviewing that just to make sure it gets discussed. Now, the one thing here is the completed file inspection. I did want to highlight that this is a required monitoring activity where everything else is more about, making sure those policies or procedures are going on a regular basis. Completed file inspections have to be done on a cyclical basis. And determining what the frequency of that is really going to be dependent on a lot of different things. It's really like a risk-based procedure as well. Now, if you're just doing compilation engagements, you've never had any large practice inspections, I mean, you may go 3 to 5 years on a cyclical basis. If you've had practice inspection issues or you've had monitoring where you've found a lot of issues, maybe you want to do those inspections on an annual basis until the issues get fixed, and then you can push it out. They typically say, for audits and reviews, you're probably doing a file by partner every 3 years, compilations every 5 years. But again, you're going to need to think about what the nature and circumstances of your firm are. Now, the big thing here with the completed file inspection, basically anybody who's doing anybody can do the monitoring activities as long as they have the appropriate expertise and they have the appropriate authority within the firm. When we talk about completed file inspections, they need to be completed by somebody who is not on that engagement team. It does have to be an independent and objective view of that file. So you can't have somebody who is on the engagement team. You cannot have the EQR. So it really has to be somebody completely different. This, therefore, may be one area where if you are a sole practitioner, you're going to need to get some external help in order to do those completed file inspections. Another thing to note is completed file inspections are different than the provincial inspections. Provincial, like the practice inspections, do not count toward the completed file inspections. Again, they're looking at the same types of files, but they're looking at it with a different lens. So it is not considered a monitoring activity for the firm. Then just in terms of documenting, the standard is very light in terms of their requirements to document. So they do talk about just kind of these high level main principles. So the roles and responsibilities. So the whole idea here is just to support just this consistent understanding of who is in charge of this quality management system. How do we know that they understand their roles and responsibilities and what they need to do? As well, we want the documentation to support consistent implementation and operation of those responses. And then finally, we need to do an evaluation. And this is going to provide the evidence that the system was designed and implemented and the responses were properly operating. And then that is all going to go into this annual evaluation by the individual with ultimate responsibility and accountability. They do have some specific matters that need to be documented as well: quality objectives, quality risks, and a description of the responses and how those quality risks were addressed. So something very specific to your quality management system. I'm not going to go through this screen, but there are some minimum requirements. This comes straight from the standard itself. And then you're going to need to retain this documentation for a sufficient period of time. Normally, that's going to be somewhere between 7 and 10 years. And really, the purpose here is to enable you to design, monitor the design, implementation, and operation of your quality management system. Okay, quick question here. How many file inspections are required for a small sole practitioner that only does 30 to 50 compilations per year? Can a CPA on your team who didn't prepare or review the file and isn't an owner complete the file inspection? Great question. I would say that if you are a sole practitioner, you're only doing, let's say you do 50 compilations per year, I'd have to look at what other risks are involved, because it is a risk-based system, risk-based process. So I would ask, what has your practice inspection results been over the last number of years? Have they had significant findings? Have you had any issues, particularly compilations have had CSRS 4200? We've got a new, relatively new compilation standard. How do you feel that you're addressing that? If you have no issues, I would do maybe a couple files every 3 to 5 years. If there is a CPA on your team, can they do it? They have to have the appropriate expertise and authority. So I would just caution that if they're not a partner, would they have the ability to stand up and tell you did something wrong or question your question your decisions that are in the file, question your judgments. Most of the times it would probably be felt that it would not be sufficient to have a manager do the completed file inspection unless that was their sole responsibility. There's nothing in the standard that says that they can't do it, but they do have to have, it's that appropriate authority. So if you're having somebody internal do it, you'll want to go through that thought process about what is their expertise, what is their experience, do they have the ability to stand up to you? And I would document, because a practice inspection comes along, they might challenge you on that one. If you had two partners, I would definitely, and you were not involved in each other's files at all, then you could swap and that would be fine. Another way to do this is find another sole practitioner who you believe has the appropriate experience and expertise, and you could swap it there too. They're just compilation engagements, so they shouldn't take more than a couple hours to do them. Okay, so I just wanted to, we'll take questions in just a moment here. So if you do have questions and want to throw it in the chat, this would be a great time to do that. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, I did want to let you know about the Telos software. So I told you at the beginning that we are a cloud-based software for small, medium-sized practitioners. We really do deal with firms who do not do audits and reviews. Typically, that's what the software does. Although with the quality management system, this could be used by any size of firm. So we do have this quality management system that can help you go through and design and implement your quality management system. We have a little bit of these reports. Objectives are built in. There is the ability to tailor those objectives. And then there are some predefined risks that you can take and assess or create your own risks. So there's at least a starting point. I think it's going to be one of your challenges is really what is the risks to my firm. So there are some default risks that you can take and you can use and you can assess, or you can create your own. So these risks are also associated with policies. So there are default policies that are in the system for those specified responses. So they can be tailored as required, and then you can devise additional responses in order to address those specific quality risks. So if you are interested, I'm just going to put that link in the chat. We are taking subscriptions now. It is an annual subscription. Our price is going to be going up July 1st. I know some of you lock in your price before May 31st, so you are getting the lower price. I have you guys on file. For those of you who are interested, you have till the end of the month to subscribe to get this current price before it increases again. So it is available now. We are also going to be having an online training course, which I was hoping to have up and running, but it's not quite there. It will be live June 15th. I will send out a link to that one, because if you subscribe to the online course before the end of this week, I'm going to give you $100 off that as well. My contact information, always happy to have a chat either about the system or about your quality management system. I can send you always a link to a Zoom call where I have a 15-minute free consultation where we can chat. So with that, I know kind of went through that last part a little quickly, but waiting for anybody who might have any questions to come on and ask. No templates will be referred. Okay, so CPA Canada does have the quality management guide. It is if you just have compilation engagements, it's a little complex to use. There is a new one. There is a new guide coming out for small practitioners that will be included in the pact. That was the plan. I don't believe it's been released yet. And there are templates both in that. They're a little bit more streamlined in the PACT. But of course, with the TILO system, there's no additional templates that's required. Everything is really embedded in the system itself. We also have quality or back in. We also have our compilation engagement software as well, where it's messed up on me. All right. Do you have any questions? I know it can be a little complex. There's a lot of information going on. All right. Well, if there is nothing left, I will let you go. I will be sending out an email with a link to the webinar recording as well as a copy of the slides. So if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me via email as well. All right, perfect. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate you being here with me today, and have a fabulous week.